51 U.S. State Department officials calling for targeted military strikes against Bashar al-Assad's Syrian regime. All 51 signed an internal document protesting U.S. policy, insisting regime change in Damascus is the only way to defeat Islamic State. Even as Iraqi commanders report this morning, they have retaken Fallujah from ISIS. Joining us now to discuss is WSJ's Maria Habib from Lebanon. Maria, thanks for being with us. We are learning that Iraqi forces say they have retaken the main government compound in the center of Fallujah from the Islamic State. Will this news affect the calls for attacks on Assad?
Well, I think that if anything, this news just kind of shows that there is tremendous momentum against the Islamic State. I mean, despite the fact that in the West you're seeing ISIS attack soft targets, whether it be a nightclub or cafes on the street in Paris, right here in the Middle East, we're actually seeing quite a bit of pressure on the caliphate. We're seeing it shrink, and we're seeing the fact that its contiguous territory between Iraq and Syria is becoming more patchy, and they're gonna, that caliphate's gonna break in two, it seems, as the U.S. and its allies continue to press it. And you also have this simultaneous attack from Russian-led forces, that include the Syrian army, Hezbollah, Iran.
Right.
So you're seeing a lot of momentum. So we'll see, but I mean, definitely at this point, Assad is regaining the momentum in Syria, and this is making those 51 officials from the State Department quite nervous in the sense that, if they believe that if Assad were to continue in power, you would see more persecution of regular Syrian civilians, and that could just kind of continue to feed the ideology and qualms that feed groups like ISIS. So they're saying best way to defeat ISIS is to get Assad out of power. Assad doesn't want to go anywhere. He wants to stay, and there's no way to actually have peace in Syria if Assad is at the helm of that nation, and therefore ISIS and such groups will continue to be a problem. That's what these officials have done.
Now, Maria, what can you tell us about the 51 U.S. officers who signed the document in question called a Descent Channel Cable? 51 is a pretty big number. Who signed it, and what exactly does it say?
So, I quote quite heavily from the story, and I actually don't have it with me right now, but it's in my personal living room. But anyway, the 51 are mostly mid-level with some high level as well. Officials, you have all sorts of officials who are working on Syria in some capacity, whether it's the counter-ISIS campaign or human rights. You have officials who are in Washington, D.C. You have officials that are at embassies in this region, all involved in Syria in one way or the other, saying, we've worked on this issue for years. The current administration's policy is not working. It's time to shake things up, and we got to do this fast, because the ceasefire that was signed between the Syrian rebels and Assad is quickly deteriorating, and Assad doesn't really want to take peace talks seriously. He's continuing to say the red line is that I will not step down, and the opposition and its regional allies and also its Western allies is saying that's just not tenable.
Now, Maria, this is an embarrassing blow to the Obama administration, whose longstanding policy has been to not take sides on the Syrian conflict. But of course, dissent on this is nothing new. So what prompted these officials to sign this cable now?
I think there's a mixture of things. First of all, you have the ceasefire that I mentioned earlier that was signed in late February, and that is just disintegrating. The Russians came out and said that they wanted a new ceasefire, but it seems like for every ceasefire that's broken, a new ceasefire is signed and then consequently broken. But that ceasefire also, we should say, has been violated from both sides, both the Damascus regime and the rebels. However, independent observers believe that the Syrian government is kind of the biggest culprit in the violations of those ceasefires. Secondly, you also have, I believe, and from analysts that I've spoken to, what they say is these officials were probably signing this cable to try and make a statement before the next administration takes power, which will be in January. Who knows if it's going to be Trump? Who knows if it's going to be Hillary? But they want to make a statement that, the status quo cannot continue to exist.
Right. So the fact that this is happening during an election year cannot be overlooked. All right, Maria, thank you so much for that.